Good morning. Sorry. Good morning. Part 2. We're back at our Franklin and Bristol mile marker. They didn't seem to care about Hill back then, even though there was a station in Hill Village. But 12 miles to Franklin, 1 mile to Bristol Village. And you can see in here the rail bed is very pronounced. You can actually, in the video, it shows up very well. You can see that hump here, where the rail bed is nice and clear. It gets a little spotty when you get back towards the Army Corps parking lot, but at the same time, at that point, you can pretty much walk wherever because it's a flat section and it all leads out to the parking area. So just again, we're in that stretch where we're pulled away from the river a little bit. You can actually see some stuff over there. We're actually in a spot where there's a house there that is off of the federal land and along 3A. So it's kind of right in the middle of the ownership here. And this whole stretch from that mile marker, I'd say the next half mile or so is just so easy and pleasant to walk on. It's flat. There's very little brush. There's a pretty evident trail here that both game and people are using. And you can see that water impoundment there. It's just catching all the water coming down the hill before it gets to the railroad grade. And then there are spots where they had culverts in the grade to get the water to the other side to the river. There's a neat spot coming up ahead. Again, I won't bore you for the entire walk because I am about a little more than a mile from the parking area, the road to the parking area. But clearly an area of old homesteads. There's stone walls. We just passed the stone wall. There's flats up there and little terraces. There's another stone wall coming up, and I imagine that there's some cell holes up there, and I'll explore a little bit. If I find something, I'll add it. But here's a little spot where they snuck by this. They're able to sneak by this bit of ledge. I'm sure they worked on that ledge a little bit. You can see some spots here where it's a little more angular. I don't see any marks. Maybe they were able to just sneak by it. It's wet through this section, but if you get down a little closer to the river, it's a little bit better. But of course, it's also been raining, and this will dry up. But this whole stretch down through here is a little bit seepy, but nothing you can't walk through. And here's another stone wall coming up. I know from the old maps that there were several old houses back here in the 1860s through the 1890s. And then, of course, the whole area was abandoned in the mid-30s. But I don't know how. I don't know if these houses were still here at that time. Wet spot. See a couple spots where it's pretty spongy, but again, it's not going to be like that all season. It will dry out, and it's pretty easy to get around. It's not very overgrown out here, and especially without the leaves on it, it's easy to see. But when the leaves come out, you can just do a quick little detour and get back on the grade where it's nice and defined. Of course, you can wander around out here. I mean, you can't really get yourself lost. You're either gonna hit 3A to the west or the river to the east. So if you stay down on the plateau, but the intervale between them, you're going to be fine all the way from Bristol to Profile Falls. We're west of the railroad grade now. We went up one level, but just sort of exploring around. And there's an old roadway here that would have led up to what's now 3A. I know on the old maps there are some old roads that come through there and come through here. And actually, here's the sign, walking sign. Thought maybe that this stone wall was originally was a boundary line, but it looks like the boundary is up on that next plateau there, and this would have been rocks along the edge of the old road. It doesn't look like it's getting much use these days, but it is certainly walkable, and I don't know if it comes up into someone's yard, so tread lightly and be careful. Neat old car here that just got deposited. Looks like they crushed it up with a tractor or something and dragged it down here. Fairly common to see stuff like that. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm sure people will let me know what kind of car it was. I don't know if it's an old Ford or Dodge or what. I don't even know if Dodge was around back then, but there's the door. You can see. Pretty neat. So again, we're up on this plateau, and maybe what we'll do is we'll walk down this road back towards the railroad grade and see if there's a cellar hole around here, and I'll let you know. Well, here's a further example of this being an old maintained road. There's actually, it's hard to see, but sorry for the fingers there. There's actually an old culvert in there. Of course, it's semi-collapsed on the exit, but you can see water running down through there, and it's coming from the hillside, obviously, but running into an old culvert, probably an old stone culvert with just laid up stone and some flat pieces of granite on top of it, and then you can see it comes down through here. Most of it's running underground, and then goes back under the roadbed there in an old box culvert or stone ford or stone culvert. Just kind of neat. And then you can see where they were pretty smart. I mean, they just benched here along and just gradually gained elevation back up to the flat. And you can see the old road. And this is actually clearer than the old railroad bed, which makes a lot of sense if this was used for hiking and recreation after the railroad bed would have been gone. But really a neat area to explore. Like I said, there's only a couple little benches in here to walk up if you want to see the whole thing. Of course, it gets steep going up to what's now 3A, but you don't have to, there's no reason for you to walk up there. In fact, there's all kinds of reason for you to not, since you come out in people's backyard. So don't do that. But we'll explore a little bit more and we'll see what we can find. Big pine tree there. The thing about this area down here is there's some really old trees. If you think about how old some of them were before the whole area was abandoned, and now there's been another 80 years plus post abandonment. So pretty neat, and some nice big old trees. There's a stone wall that goes all the way down to the river. I crossed that on the railroad grade down below. I haven't seen any other cellar holes yet. They might be up closer to the flat. I just don't, towards what's now 3A, I don't know. But you can, down in the valley down there is the railroad grade. There's a massive oak down there. Let's see if we can, that oak tree right there is massive. It's also hollow on the inside. It's hard to see in the video, but I can actually see it from the naked eye from up here, you can see where it's hollow at the base. But a huge oak, and just a beautiful tree. It's probably 4 feet at breast height down there, 4 feet diameter. It's pretty neat. All right, we're gonna take a break here and see what else we can see. Okay, we're looking north right here, but we're actually heading south. I wanted to see how close to the river the railroad grade was back in the day. And here's a stretch. You know, they didn't have to do too much digging from sort of the, well, actually for most of the section, they didn't have to do too much digging, more just some leveling, and of course they humped the grade up to keep it dry. But this is a stretch in here where it starts to keep the grade. They had to dig through a pretty good chunk of ground here. Of course, this is all gravel and sand, so it's not like it was too hard of digging, but again, it was the mid 1800s, so it wasn't exactly easy. But, and again, not very easy to see, but if you look in this video and you see where the sort of the ground stops and the daylight starts, you can see how deep it is. It's probably 20 feet at this stretch, but then it becomes a little bit taller, and actually on both sides. So they had a pretty major cut through here. And again, you know, this is all outwash river gravel and sand. So today it'd be pretty darn easy with a big excavator and a bulldozer to blast your way through here. But, you know, I'm sure they had steam shovels and a lot of handwork, but steam shovels and you know, just grading this whole area out, which would have been neat to see some history on it. You can see here on both sides, up there and up there, they really had to cut through here. It's really, frankly, amazing the lack of history of this stretch. I'm sure that the Army Corps has all of the original drawings and the railroad stuff from when they did the acquisition, but of course they're not forthcoming with any information at all. I'm sure these railroad plans are in the Registry of Deeds, but in my digging last night, of course, the registry online stuff only goes back to the 60s, which for most things is perfectly fine. But if we want to dig up the drawings and the original, there is the New Hampshire Archive has a listing for a sketch of this layout, but it's not available online. Again, I don't know why. I guess you have to go to the archive to see it. I'm just looking in here, and it's a little hard to see on the video, but there's all these little humps, and I did see a railroad tie back a ways, and I'm wondering actually if all these little humps are old ties that have rotted away. They're spaced right. Anyways, here we're coming out of the cut and back on to, you know, the interval between the river and the road. And the old, I came back down off that road, and that has the feel of an old cellar up there, but I don't know if I'll explore it today. I've got to get to work. But came out here early to see what was going on and see if I could piece it together back out to the trail, which I did. Back out to the not sculptured rocks, Profile Falls, back out to the parking area. And from here, it's just a really easy walk back out there, with the exception of right close to the parking area. The beaver have actually been, it's right on the river, and the beaver have actually been very busy. I'll show you that in a minute. And it's a little brushy there, but certainly you can get through and stay on the bed if you want to, and if you don't want to, it's wicked easy to just walk either the old road, which is just above us there. You can actually see the topography line there. You can see that coming down, and that's only about 150, 200 feet away from us. And it doesn't join the railroad grade down here, obviously, but it gets actually within 50 feet here as that slope comes down. It's kind of neat. The grade is very pronounced here. Here you can see where the old road that I was on earlier comes down. You can see it there. Here's the grade, and there's the road on the left, and it comes down, and it, getting around this big ridge line that's coming down to a point here. And so it squeezed it down in, and the road got close, and then it that old road sort of disappears out there against the base of the hill there. And I'm sure it can be found, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that when the railroad grade is nice and easy in this stretch. A word about the round table. I may have seen it, I may have not. I know closer to Bristol, there's some areas where there's a lot of cement and not cement. There's a lot of granite laid up in different ways, and obviously there was something going on. So it's very unclear to me until I get a look at the original layout plan where exactly the round table was. There's supposedly there's a flat area with granite and stuff that you can see, but there's a lot of flat areas down here, and in spots there's a lot of granite. So I'm not sure. There very clearly is a little ramp here. So I don't know if they had a stop for water or something, but they clearly had you can see that dips down and that dips down, but right down here there's a ramp to the river, which is kind of neat. It almost looks like they had a crossing because it's in the area where the road comes down and crosses and maybe the road came on the other side of the railroad grade at this point, but I don't see a lot of evidence of that. But maybe they just built up a ramp so people could get to the river. I don't know. That's kind of neat. It almost looks like a piece, definitely a piece of an old tailstock, or it doesn't look like a boiler. It doesn't look thick enough, but it's a big round pipe that came down the river at some point. There's a very big retaining wall on the other side. You can see it there in the video on the New Hampton side of the river, and I'm sure there was an old mill or something there back in the day. Have to look at the old maps. Dartmouth Library has some really nice collections of the old maps, but you used to be able to go into the local, I can remember getting from the local Innisfree bookstore there in Meredith, and they had a local section with a lot of historical stuff, and I picked up a copy of the maps from 1890, I think it was 1865 and 91, or 61 and 95, but they're really interesting to compare the difference between right at the time of the Civil War and post-Civil War, and you can actually see all of a lot of the homesteads were then gone 30 years later after the Civil War, and people headed west, and there was just large-scale farm and land abandonment in this area during that period. A really neat area. There's a little floodplain below us where the water comes up in the spring or in high water events, and actually on the other side of the river it's a little hard to see, but you can actually see a lot of debris like they pull out of maybe it just gets hung up there over time, or maybe they've dumped it there over time, but I don't know, there's a lot of debris over there, including some old those orange that you can see are some old buoys, like a buoy line that they keep across the river at times. And actually, I can see now that that's the big island that's in the river. But this area was clearly underwater earlier this spring. All of the vegetation is laid down, headed south. But it's not really scoured, so it doesn't look like it was a huge event. Really neat area here where the grade again is very pronounced, but it does get a little thicker down through this section, and we'll actually see where the beaver have been active. But really neat spot. There's a low wet area on the other side, and then there's this little peninsula of land that goes out between that wet area and this big ponded area here, this big backwater area here. Just very neat. It's open water, combination of open water, and there's some woody vegetation poking through there also. Kind of really neat, and some really old big trees, big pine trees and oaks, and just a beautiful, beautiful spot. But you can actually see here, it's a little hard to tell, but the railroad grade itself is about 2 feet lower. Maybe the camera will pick it up as I'm walking up, but there's a levee they sort of built up that's about 2 to 3 feet above the grade of above the railroad grade here on the riverside. So they clearly had a history, you know, even early on, you know, they had a history of flooding the grade. Here's a spot, a little break between where the beaver and the animals have historically traveled through there, and worn that down and made it easier. You can start to see here, there's really generations of beaver activity in here. That one there is not very fresh, but not very old either. There's probably some bank beaver in here. Obviously the river is not a great place for a den, but or a hut, I should say. But you can see here some beaver activity that's not fresh, but there is a fresh or semi-fresh trail here. You can see where it's brighter. That's a trail where the beaver have come up and over the grade here and down into the river, or the bank anyways. Really neat spot. Like I said, it takes a little more doing to walk through here. There's a little more brush sticking up because of the beaver activity. You know, they cut things down, it lets a little more sunlight in, and everything sprouts and it gets a little thicker. But here's another spot. It's a well-worn beaver trail going down to the river and to the backwater. It's a little, like I said, a little trickier, but not impossible to get through here. You just gotta wander around a little bit, push some branches aside. Now, of course, you can come down here and get off the grade a little bit, and down here in the lower area, it might be a little bit easier to get through there. But again, if you're used to walking in the woods, it's not really bad at all. Here you can see all these. Here's a better look. All these little short stubs are all hardwood trees that the beaver have gotten over the last couple of years. There's a fresh one there. It's kind of neat. There's probably, I haven't seen it yet, but there's probably a hut somewhere along the edge of that backwater. Here's a spot where the river did find its way through the railroad grade at some point in time when the water was high. This is the spot, but you can see a big washout there. The grade is there and there, and of course a big washout there. But it's an easy walk around. The ground is not bad getting around it. These trees down here along the river are kind of neat. It's not like they're rare. I wouldn't call them rare, but they're not seen all the time. They're actually blue beech. They're in the beech family. Some people call them ironwood. They have these hard ridges. These hard ridges that go up and down that go up and down the stem. They look like American beech. That's sort of twisted, and here's a very pronounced one. You can see this ridge here. It's called blue beech or ironwood. It's a very, very hard wood. I'm pretty sure it was used for like axe handles and you know, handle stock and stuff like that. It's hard to split. Tough wood. But you don't see a lot of it. But it doesn't surprise me that it'd be down here along the river bottom. So here we are, we're back on the road that leads to that big, you can see that the big field is not too far from us, big field by the river down on the flood control land, the recreation area. And that's leading to the gate, which is closed now, but it's usually open, you know, as the season goes along. It'll probably open. And but you can walk out here really easy. And just for a point of reference, as you walk, I'm heading back towards the parking area by the gate, but just to turn around and show you, as you're walking out here, you can just sort of start to glimpse the field. There's a culvert there, and on the right side of the road, you can clearly see the old railroad grade keeps continuing, and eventually, you know, ties into the area that's open for recreation now. I wouldn't recommend going on that section because there are a couple of spots where some bridges have collapsed and disappeared over time, and it's not as easy a walk, but you can just walk out the road and walk out to the parking area and take a left, and you'll be, you know, heading towards Old Hill Village. But point of reference, you come in the road, you see that culvert, you see the railroad grade on the right side, start to see the field through a couple of openings between the trees, and the old railroad grade, if you look on the right side, it just continues straight across, although it's much less pronounced in this area. It's just running along the flat here. But if you walk out there along that flat and keep the river on your right and the wetland on your left, you'll run into the grade where it's very pronounced, and from there it's you know, it's indicated all the way up along to Bristol. And so that's part two. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you come out and use it, and be smart, stay away from folks. But here's a nice little local opportunity to get out and walk, and you know, it'd be a nice if you had a family that was quarantined together. You know, it'd be a nice spot where you could come down with two vehicles, spot a vehicle, and then go back to town and work your way down, or vice versa. Start from down here and work your way up to Bristol. But or if you want to make a 4-mile trek of it, you know, you could walk from the village, Bristol Village, down 3A to the recreation area, and then into the area, and then back up the grade. It'd be a nice little 4 or 4.5 mile loop. Maybe 5 before things are all said and done, the turns and stuff along the river. But be a nice little hike.